Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 172. I sat down with Ellis Armistead. He is a former police sergeant and a former police detective. He's currently a legal investigator. He resides in Colorado, but he and I both happen to be in Nashville at the same time. So he was kind enough to sit down with me and have this conversation. A bit of a warning for this episode, it does have graphic content. Ellis worked on cases including the JonBenet Ramsey case, the Columbine shooting, Eric Harris specifically, and the Oklahoma City bombing. He worked with Timothy McVeigh in the appeals. So that's some heavy-duty stuff, but Ellis also references a few other grisly things, and I just wanted y'all to know that before you listen. At one point in the episode, Ellis and I start talking about childhood stuff, or how kids behave these days versus back in the day, and we talk about the idea of good people doing bad things, and we talk a little bit about sexual assault and that sort of thing. I wanted to bring something up that I actually said to Ellis after we were done recording, and I want to mention it here. When I was young, I'd say 9th grade, this big swath of woods that my friends and I would all hang out in, and after school, we'd go sit up on the hill in the woods and talk, my girlfriends and I, and a lot of times we got stoned and talked about life and our families and this, that, and the other. And we, bitched and moaned about our parents and teachers and boyfriends, or lack thereof in my case, but, all this stuff. And one of our friends, all of her complaints and stuff, they seemed totally normal. She definitely had a heavier personality. Like, you could tell there was a lot on her mind, but, we talked about all sorts of things, the handful of us that would go sit up on this hill. We were all very close. Well, it wasn't until years and years later as an adult that I found out that when she would go home, her stepfather would molest her and in fact rape her. And, I found that out later in life. And on the hill as a kid, I never knew that about her. She kept that secret. That's a heavy duty secret. And she kept it from, the closest people in her life, her best friends. And I'm bringing that up because I think it's important, when Ellis and I talk about good people doing bad things. Whenever I saw her stepdad, he was nothing but nice to me. I would have had no idea. He didn't even give me, the willies. He was just a dad, And so all I'm saying about that is good people do bad things, and maybe they're not so good. And also maybe everybody's fighting a battle, and nobody knows what that is except for the person fighting the battle. I hope we can be, more aware of the people around us that we love and care for. Watch the subtle signs. If you see something or you feel something isn't quite right, try and do something to help the person if you can. Or reach out to somebody who can. There's a lot of services out there, family services and Planned Parenthood and rape crises services and school counselors. If you see something or something doesn't feel right, we were young and naive and didn't know those kinds of things happened, or maybe we did and we didn't think it could happen to our friends. And it does happen. And there are a lot of secrets out there, and especially in families. So, just keep that in your hat and think about it. And that's just my opinion, but I wish we could have helped her back then. Okay. I referenced 2 other episodes in this episode, including Adam Shelby, episode 12. He was the guy that had been both to prison and in the military. And then the other episode I reference is episode 148, and that's with Joe Stiles, who is a bail bondsman. So if you're interested in checking those episodes out, there you go. Episodes 12 and 148. The usual stuff, social media, Hey Human Podcast. You can find my personal social media at Susan Ruthism. You can reach me, Susan, at heyhumanpodcast.com. This episode, like many of the episodes, in fact, by many I mean all of the episodes, I have curated links and books and researchy things and movies and YouTubes and all that stuff, and I've put them all handy for you to check out on the links page there on heyhumanpodcast.com. Exciting email that I got this week. Hey Human was ranked on iTunes at number 880, so it's moving up the charts. Thanks to you. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. And by the way, a bunch of you rated and reviewed it this week. I appreciate that too. So if you haven't rated and reviewed Hey Human on iTunes, please do so. It's obviously doing something to help get the word out. So I really appreciate that. Amazon portal is on the front page of heyhumanpodcast.com. If you shop Amazon, do so through that portal, and it helps support Hey Human and keep it ad-free, which I like that it's ad-free. I'm sure you do too. Okay. Yes, that's about it. And remember, this episode has graphic content. Thank you for listening, and thank you for helping to push Hey Human up the ranks at iTunes. It's very exciting. Looking forward to it. Keeping on, keeping up. All right, let's get into this. Here we go. Ellis Armistead, welcome to Hey Human.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you being here. You've flown in from Colorado.
Yes.
I would like to think it's just for this, but I know better. But we are in a historic room in Nashville, Tennessee, Eddie Arnold's office.
Right.
I think you mentioned that you thought it was maybe untouched since he's died, and I think you're right. All the things that we are seeing in here.
There's a lot of history in here.
Wow. I mean, it's crazy. Anyway, thanks for being here. We were introduced by your little brother, Steve.
Right.
And he said, you've got to talk to my brother Ellis. He's so fascinating. And he sent me your website. And you are fascinating. Boy, have you seen some stuff in your lifetime. Let's go back to the beginning. What did you go to college for?
I went to college from political science.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
At Vanderbilt.
Mm-hmm. You're a Tennessee boy.
In Tennessee, yeah.
Yeah.
I was raised in Decatur, Alabama. My dad was an engineer at NASA there.
And your mom, well, she was a nurse at Vanderbilt?
She was a nursing administrator in the hospital in Alabama.
Okay. Why did I think she was also...
Well, she graduated from Vanderbilt.
Oh, is that what it was? Okay. Did your dad as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And my sister.
Did Steve go there?
No, he went to partied at the University of Alabama.
That sounds more appropriate for him. Okay.
He was on the 6-year plan.
Yeah. Poli-sci, did you, at the time, did you have aspirations for going into what was to become your profession, or was it just...
I had no idea. It was actually the furthest thing from my mind.
So how did you end up becoming a police officer?
When I was in high school, my dad took me down to a pawn shop / gun store and volunteered me to the owner to work for nothing. And I think I was about 15, and the owner is a guy named Frank Wiley. He was Wiley Sporting Goods, and he said, okay. So my dad left pretty pleased, but what he didn't know is that Wiley slipped me money in cash. He said, I can't let you work for free. Never ruined it for my dad. But when I got out of Vanderbilt, I took the LSAT. I did fairly well, enough to get into law school, probably not Vanderbilt. But I went back to, I didn't want to work in a bank. My dad wanted me to, and I just found it too boring. And I went back to Decatur for a while, and the policemen would come and go from this shop because they were into guns, and actually one of them worked there part-time, a guy named Joe Anders. After a few months, they convinced me, hey, you can get a job at the police department, ride a motorcycle, and you'll have a good time. And I thought, well, I don't know what else I'm going to do. So I did it as a lark, really. I think my parents were mortified. I was the first, I joined the police department. I had no training. I'd shot guns before, but I don't think I'd ever shot a pistol, maybe with my grandfather. So they hand me, I get this pistol, they put me in uniform. The first night they made me drink about a half pint of moonshine whiskey up in the DUI room, which is kind of ironic, but that was an initiation. And that was back when the moonshine was made with radiators, so there was a lot of lead in it, I'm sure. The next morning, after my first shift, the chief came in and handed me my badge and said, "You're now an official son of a bitch." That was my swearing in. I worked as a policeman for several months before they sent me to the academy. I mean, this was a life totally foreign to me.
So even before you went,
I had no idea this went on
by fire
in Decatur, Alabama, which is kind of a medium-sized Alabama city.
And what year was this?
Probably 1973. And things went after midnight in a small southern town like that. There's a whole nother life after midnight.
What was some of the first things you saw for those first days before going out?
Some of them were my parents' friends who were out slipping around. So, I was down on what they're called the other side of the tracks, where they generally put me, and a lot of fights, actually quite a few shootings and murders. But they didn't take them very seriously, particularly if you're a minority. You could barely get a detective to get out of bed. He'd say, "We'll take it in the morning," or something like that,
Were you scared to be around all that? I mean, you're quite tall, 6'7", 6'8", I'm guessing. Is that about right?
6'7", yeah.
Yeah, so your stature, I'm sure, afforded you some sort of authority.
Yeah. I don't ever remember being really scared of the job. There are times in the job that you're on high alert. The first call I ever went on, we went up, I think it was a domestic. But I remember when I was leaving with this other officer and everything was fine, and we got just about to the fence gate and the owner turned the dog loose on us, came shooting out from the front door. And that was my initiation to what I was up to.
You get to the police academy and graduate from there. And
in Alabama, yeah.
In Alabama, and do you come back then? Because now I assume if you have a college degree, do you immediately go to detective, or does it take time?
I came back from the police academy, which was then pretty fundamental, and went back to work on the street. I was eventually promoted to sergeant. I was the youngest one. All the people I supervised were much older than I was.
How did they like that?
Some of them didn't, but most of them I got along with, and I still see my old lieutenant. I may see him tomorrow, but still there.
Yeah, still kicking
much
around.
Older now. I thought he was old back then.
When you do you have any particular things from the very beginning that you still bring to mind?
I think the first DOA I went on It was in kind of what they would call a shotgun house, and the heat was on, and this African American woman had died supposedly in her sleep. But back then they didn't even autopsy cases like that. And I just remember the dim light bulb in her room, just a bare light bulb, the heat, and the smell.
Do you ever get used to that smell?
Yeah, actually I did. That's one of the reasons that I later on, when I moved to Colorado, I had the ability to just take a deep breath, and I got used to it, and and I was kind of known for that.
How long were you in Alabama before you left for Colorado?
About 3.5 years.
So relatively quickly.
Quickly. They were recruiting. Well, I was only making $6,000 a year. And I remember that I thought the chief was rich because he was making $12,000. And this was wasn't a huge department. It was about 50 men. Was it weird? I'm not to backtrack too much because I do want to know about your changing from Alabama to Colorado, but obviously civil rights tensions were at an all-time high. Things were nutty, especially in the South, especially in Alabama. As a police officer you come from a liberal family. Your family is, to my knowledge, very on the left side. That's correct, probably.
Yeah, on the left side of the lean. And how was that, especially with your fellow officers, maybe some who were not kind to people of color?
Back then it wasn't as polarizing as it is now. We really didn't talk politics. There was some racism I saw in some of them, but not all of them. I remember a dispatcher calling out one night, and some African Americans were driving down, I guess it was 6th Avenue, and he had done something, and he says, "There's a load of coal coming your way." So there was a little bit of that, yeah. Mm-hmm. Most of the officers knew my mom from the hospital, in the ER, so they probably cut me a little slack.
Since she is in the medical profession through that time for you, did she prepare you for any of the things you were going to see?
She was horrified. When I got on a motorcycle, I was once called to an accident scene. It was out in the country, but within the police jurisdiction. He was about 8, I think, 7 or 8. His grandparents lived on one side of the road, and his parents lived on the other side. And he ran across the street, and a truck hit him. Well, I was the first one there, other than, the first officer there. And I pulled up, and it was just real quiet, and I could hear somebody crying up on the porch. It was quite a ways away from the highway. And I got off my motorcycle, and everyone kind of looked at me, and I saw there was obviously a body covered up on the highway. And I guess being foolish or something, I went up and pulled the sheet back, and he'd lost his head. And everyone was looking at me, and they just turned their eyes up into the yard, and that's where his head was. I went back to my parents after that was over that evening, and I didn't have any place to go, really. I wasn't living at home, but I just go back, and they didn't want to hear about it. And so I went down to a local steakhouse and just sat it out.
Is there ever any recovering from that?
Not totally, no.
with the first responders especially, you think about nowadays, the likelihood of them staying in their positions are shorter and shorter because it's so traumatic. And now we know a lot more about PTSD and such.
Well, I'll be honest with you, I've been diagnosed with it. But back then, and even into the 80s, there was no, if you were in a shooting or something, which I was a couple of times, they never, there was no support from the city. In fact, they saw if you were seeing somebody, it was considered a liability, because if the city ever got sued back then, and it came out that you were going to a therapist or something, that was considered a huge liability. Whether it was or legally, I don't know, but that was the rationale.
I imagine that's why so many police, first responders, police, fire people, even emergency room doctors have such high instances of alcohol, drug, and suicide. A lot of suicide.
I've known many of all those, not many. A couple of doctors, several policemen. Back then, we really didn't have EMS. It was just two clowns in a station wagon or a van and with an oxygen tank. They didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
They maybe had basic first aid, but I even doubt that.
Yeah, wow. What presented itself in Colorado that was more appealing?
Well, the city of Lakewood, which is a large suburb of Denver, was recruiting across the country, and it tripled my income. I did have an aunt and uncle living out there, so I knew somebody. So I went to the police department. My first day, I remember my dad and I pulled a trailer with my few belongings out there. And we got an apartment, and he flew back home. And so the first day of work, I go and eat breakfast in IHOP. I walk into the police station, and I introduce myself to the desk officer. And he says, "Where's your white sheet?" Referring to the Klan. He was from New York, and he may listen to this and remember making that statement. But it was a totally different. The chief had come from Los Angeles. A lot of the officers were from Los Angeles, and the class I was in, a lot of them came from New York City, because there was a downturn in the New York economy, and they laid a bunch of policemen off. I remember working with one policeman who'd never been in a patrol car before. He just worked high rises in New York City. So the whole thing was totally foreign to him, as was his experiences to me.
Did you go in as a sergeant?
No, I went in they call it a lateral transfer. I went in patrol.
Wait, what does that mean? If you were a sergeant in Alabama, is it?
Well, you don't keep the rank. You just go in. Essentially,
it's not like the military.
You essentially start fresh. You don't have to go to academy to have. I think I had 3 days of training on the law and that kind of stuff. But then I rode along with an officer for a while, a week or so, and they put me out on my own.
What were the big differences between the Alabama police force and this Colorado police force?
Probably the technology, the support.
And this would
they had a crime lab, which there was nothing like that in
CSI stuff,
at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. This was around 77-ish?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
77 or 70. Yeah, probably 77. Just the equipment was better. They provided my uniforms. They gave me cleaning allowance. To me, it was a lush lifestyle. It was a lot more structured than what I was. Alabama back in my day tend to be a little wild. The policemen. Sometimes there's a thin line between the policemen and the people they arrest. And that's true in every city, not just Alabama.
Mm-hmm. I believe that. Yeah.
And I'm a supporter of the police.
Well, of course, but human beings are human beings.
It's a trap that.
And absolute power, you know, when you give somebody that kind of power, depending on a person's personality, I mean, your personality is going to dictate how you are. So if you're a chill person and you get drunk, for example, you'll be a real chill, drunk person. But if you have an underlying anger issue and you get drunk, the anger comes out. So put a uniform on someone. Entirely
accurate.
Yeah.
I mean, I was fortunate, and you can probably tell my personality, at least outwardly, is fairly laid back. And I think that has worked for 40 years or more now to my advantage, both when I worked in law enforcement and in the private sector. It takes a lot to get me excited.
As you're moving up through the ranks in Colorado, you had a lot of stuff going on. You worked for the district attorney?
Well, what happened is I was in patrol for a relatively short time, and I was going to graduate school. That was another thing. To the old law enforcement grant, the department paid for my graduate school. And the captain from detectives called me one night at home and asked me if I was still in school. I said, yeah. He said, would you be interested in working homicide? And I said, I guess. And he said, well, show up Monday morning. So I show up Monday morning and I go up to the sergeant, and the captain had neglected to tell the homicide sergeant I was coming. So it was a little bit awkward, but then they gave me a desk, and away I went.
Did you have trepidation for that, considering how, I mean, homicide means people who have died?
No, I didn't have long to think about it. I think he called me on a Saturday night, or even Sunday night, I don't know. I didn't have long, so I'd never really thought it through, and then I just barged into it. I had an excellent partner who was older than I am, who taught me a lot. I mean, that's how I learned. Initially, I was going out on primarily suicides. They use that as kind of a training exercise, because you're supposed to treat a suicide like a homicide until you prove it's not.
Did you ever come upon suicides where it turned out to be a homicide that you knew?
No.
You
mean, you hear there's a lot of urban legend about that.
Was there any case in those first few years as a detective that stand out to you?
One of the first suicides I went on by myself, I walked into the house and I stepped on this guy's teeth. I'm going, this is special, you know. And the patrolman directed me to the bathroom, and this guy had literally blown his head off with a high-powered rifle in his mouth. He left a note on the kitchen table. He said, "My last request, a closed casket, please." I'm going, well, I think we can honor that. Mm-hmm. But I had to call my partner back at the office and say, I needed to come out and I just needed somebody besides me at age 26 or 27, whatever it was, who I just needed someone that knew more than I did, even though it was obviously a suicide.
Do you have to compartmentalize something like that when you look? I've seen people who have passed away before. I've seen dead bodies, and they don't, that's the person, but it's also not the person. In order to deal with that stuff, did you have to, in a way, not dehumanize, but do you know what I'm trying to say?
Well, in a way you do dehumanize it, because you learn to look at the body as a piece of evidence. They're no longer there. So your focus, and that of the crime lab, because they would come out on those too, mentally you treated the body like a piece of evidence.
Does that help at all?
As it turns out, I didn't have problems until I was 40 years old. and I started having nightmares.
Back then?
Back then, yeah.
It took that long for your brain to say, you know what?
I was kind of a cowboy. I mean, I prided myself on being able to walk into any scene, even when other people were out throwing up or something, and it didn't bother me until I was 40, and then it bothered me. I'd go home and go to sleep. My ex-wife would make me take my shoes off, because back then they would have blood on them sometimes, but I'd go to sleep a full night.
What do you think made this switch in you?
Switch what?
Where it didn't bother you and then it did. That you just shoved it all down for so long, and did some particular case trigger that, or just...
When I worked, after I left the police department, I got promoted as sergeant there in Lakewood. And they put me on midnights, and I just couldn't stand it. And that's a natural progression. If you're promoted and you're in the detective division, you go back to the street as a supervisor. I lasted maybe a year or less, and I got offered a job as the chief investigator in the large judicial district, essentially covered northwest Colorado. And
that sounds like a big job.
Well, it's not real populated. I mean, we're talking Steamboat Springs, Craig, Dinosaur, Winter Park. We had 3 offices that are about 100 miles apart.
And this is private sector then?
No.
Oh, it's not?
When I was with the district attorney.
Oh, I see.
I was still a law enforcement officer. And I did mostly homicides, because a lot of the departments were small, like 2-man departments out in these country. And I had to go on all of them. They wouldn't handle them.
Was it generally not too difficult to figure out who done it, considering most people are murdered by people they know, or not?
Yeah, that's generally true. I would guess 75 to 80% of the cases I worked weren't real difficult. I'll be honest with you. I mean, everyone says, oh, you did all this. And well, it doesn't take much when some husband, after killing his wife, is crying in front of your desk, what have I done? And I'm going, dude, you're going away. Which, to me, at that age, was kind of fun. What turned me into... What finally made me leave law enforcement was I was called to a scene out on a country road in Colorado, and there was a big, looked like a trash dump. But what it was is some guy had killed a husband and wife and their 18-month-old. And I remember being in the morgue when we were doing the autopsies, and for some reason, before or after the autopsy, I picked up this 18-month-old, and hopefully after, but back then, he had a contact gunshot wound to the back of his head, and I said, then it's time for me to leave.
Was the perpetrator caught?
Oh, yeah. Within a day. He was a friend of the family. A weirdo, but friend of the family, married, no kids. I still see his picture in the prison website,
He's still incarcerated?
Yep.
Yeah. Did you start to... So the 70s was when the idea of profiling was just starting to, late 70s, early 80s? Just starting to kind of pick up the idea of it. But were you, as you were sitting at your desk and seeing case after case, human beings are extraordinary in their snowflakeness, how different they are, but they're really not as far as what drives us. That's relatively simple. So were you being able to, did you start to see profiles? And
Yeah, I mean, profiling is nothing new. It became more formalized, but we all profile. If you go down on Broadway here at 2 a.m., you're probably going to look at some dude and say, I don't think I want to be around him, or you're profiling. An example I remember is when the profiling, when it became an issue. I mean, I had to be honest that I profiled. If I was on patrol and saw an African American walking through the country club district of Denver with a TV on his shoulder.
Did he have to have the TV? Would it have just been?
Probably wouldn't even had to have the TV. He was just out of place, as much so as a rich old lady covered in diamonds down in the poor part of town. She's out of place. That's the human nature. I mean, and I know there's been a lot of controversy about it, and I understand it. I understand it can be abused, but it also has its place in good law enforcement. You can't help it. It's the intuitive part of the job, and at times it does get abused. And
I think probably more now than even maybe, or maybe not. I don't know.
I think
been around for a long.
You know, I've been quite a while since I've been in law enforcement, but I think the training is now to be more sensitive, and I think most of them are. There's always exceptions, you know.
Yeah, I think about that because, as you said, we profile just on a daily basis, which is true in dating, or when we're looking for babysitters, or whatever it is, or which grocery store you want to shop at because you like the clerks or not.
Right.
But anymore, I think humanity. Firstly, we're also blended anyway, but it is across the board. It doesn't. To me, I have found that it doesn't matter what color people are, or religion, or whatever. People are continually surprising me as far as the depths of depravity and cruelness that people are capable of.
Yeah, I mean,
as far as domestic terrorism, I think we've pretty much nailed it on the young white guy.
Right. I mean,
to be a profile
there's an example, or the guy that went into Walmart in, I think, Missouri a couple of weeks ago after the El Paso shooting, and he was dressed in, I think, a helmet and
flak jacket,
and had an AK-47. Well, people immediately profiled him. That's good profiling. And then he got arrested. He said he was testing the Second Amendment.
That was the second one, not the first one that went in and shot people. You're talking about the guy.
No, this guy didn't shoot anybody.
Yeah, this was the guy the next week. Yeah.
Yeah, he walked in to test the Second Amendment, and he was
not lucky. The brightest bulb on the tree.
No.
And lucky. Also, he's full of shit.
Yeah, he's lucky he didn't get shot. Or we're probably unlucky that he didn't.
Where did you decide? That was the final straw. You saw the family and you went, nope.
Well, it took a few months. And I had to finish out that case. The hardest part of those cases for me was the families that were left behind. I forget where this kid's grandparents were, but they would call me just about every day crying.
What did the man say when you finally arrested him? His reason?
He didn't say anything initially, but after he was offered a plea in lieu of the death penalty, part of the plea agreement was he had to tell me all the details. And I found that pretty difficult interview.
Was he honest with you?
Yeah. I mean,
was he a sociopath?
I'm not sure I'm able to really diagnose that, but I would guess, And
what was his reasoning? Do you recall?
He couldn't really give a reason. I mean, he lived in a upper income neighborhood in Denver. I forget he knew these people, friends from I forget what the connection was. Yeah, I remember thinking he even after an hour or two of detailing everything he'd done, I couldn't really figure out what triggered it. Maybe somebody else could, but
what's your
I remember his attorney sitting by him, and he just had his head in his hands, the attorney did, listening to it.
It's got to be insane trying to be a defense attorney with people like that.
Oh,
because,
absolutely.
Yeah. Did he have remorse?
I don't think so. That would probably be a big thing in his diagnosis. If you go into the DSM-5 now or something.
DSM-5, what is that?
It's a psychiatric where you make diagnoses that gives them a number of different levels of schizophrenia and so forth. I really didn't try, to be honest with you, I didn't try to think too hard about that. I just didn't want to because it didn't matter to me. I mean, if it was a motive, maybe, but most of them, there wasn't a real motive. They just did it, and
that's
maybe it was in their mind, yeah.
Yeah, in your experience, that people just decide one day I'm going to kill this person, and then they just do it.
For whatever, I'm sure there's something wrong with them, but I didn't spend a lot of time trying to figure it out.
Yeah. I'm curious, as we talked about, the rate of suicide is quite high with first responders and doctors and things. Do you think there's any correlation with seeing people who are victims of suicide and thinking that's, you start putting yourself in that level, like a weird level of empathy?
The only time I really empathized, or sympathized, was every now and then I would get an old elderly couple where the man would shoot the wife and then shoot himself. But if you talk to the family, they were in poor health, poor financial condition. They're in their 80s. I remember one, they were just laying in bed and he just reached over and shot her in the side of the head and shot himself. And they weren't violent people. No criminal history, no psychiatric history that I remember. It was just kind of a way out of this world, which I understand the dynamic of that. The others, if people knew who they were going to leave, what it was going to do to the people they leave behind, they generally wouldn't do it because it's more devastating than murder. And I would always tell the families, you can't impose rational thinking on an irrational act, because the survivors, while grieving, are still generally rational. The odds are the person, at the moment he pulled the trigger or hung himself or whatever he did, was not thinking rationally.
It's fascinating, and a bit of, there's irony to that, because you as the detective have to apply rational thinking to irrational acts in order to get to the bottom of them.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But I tried to encourage the families, because they would kind of cling to you for a long time after that. And that was kind of my mantra. I don't know where I learned it, or if I made it up, or I just used it a lot, and I still do. What
did you begin to do with the district attorney? What was your role there?
Just investigations, but because of my background, I did some white collar, but it's mostly homicide investigations.
Was it there that you became involved in the Timothy McVeigh?
No.
Because I know that was Oklahoma, but...
I left law enforcement in the district attorney's office, and I bought a small process serving firm from a woman in Steamboat Springs, where I live. I lived in Steamboat, which was kind of the center of the district, and it also allowed me to ski a lot, which I did, and run. Those were kind of my releases. And
how old are you at this point?
When I left, I was probably 40 or 41 probably.
So you were already starting to feel some of the stuff bubbling up.
Yeah.
Did that determine your leaving?
Yeah, pretty much. And I went with my wife and another couple to Nepal, and we trekked for a number of weeks and went to Thailand, the beaches in Thailand. But I can honestly say my time in Nepal was, to this day, was probably the most peaceful time in my life.
I'm glad you got to do that. When you left, so you took on the process serving.
Well, that was just to have a business.
Is that bail bond stuff, right?
No, it's serving like subpoenas.
And warrants and things?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Similar to that.
I had a bail bondsman on the show. He was lovely.
Yeah, I know a few.
Yeah, he's great. I didn't know if they were in the same family or what.
Well, no. This is where, say you sue somebody, and then you hire a process server to go give them the papers, you know.
Mm-hmm. You tape it to the Frisbee and then go to the park and throw the Frisbee at them. That's how they do it in the movies.
I didn't do much of it myself. And
you put it in the pizza box.
Eventually, the word, actually rather quickly, the word got out in Denver that I was out on my own. And several of the defense attorneys who would come up from Denver, particularly if it was a major crime, who used to cross-examine me on the stand and give me a hard time. Now they were calling me to help them defend their cases. The first homicide I did as a private, what we call legal investigators, was 2 kids killed a highway patrolman. And the most difficult, I was fresh out of law enforcement, and here I am, they call it going to the dark side. And it was a little difficult, but no, it wasn't that bad.
Did you only get on the stand with people that you thought were innocent, or did you have to be defense regardless of your own personal beliefs?
Well, I tried, and it's probably totally impossible, but I tried not to let my personal beliefs into the job, because you're working with people from all races, all religions, all...
I don't mean by judgmental by their race, color, creed, or sexual orientation. I mean by you look at the evidence and think, oh, for sure Billy killed Bonnie.
Sure, I would testify. That was part of my job. I enjoy testifying.
But you were testifying for defense.
No.
Oh.
Back when I was in law enforcement.
Oh, I see. Got it.
We would arrest somebody, would build a case, and then I would end up in court along with the lab people and other witnesses testifying for the prosecution.
But when you went to the dark side...
You don't testify as much.
I see.
Every now and then, but not as much.
That can get tricky, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean...
Especially if you have a long history of knowing things.
Well, when you're doing defense work, there's a confidentiality issue because you're working as the agent of the attorney. So the attorney-client privilege extends to you, too. So it's very seldom... Sometimes in a motions hearing or something, I might testify, but not very often.
How long were you doing that for?
I still am.
Oh, you're still on that? Okay. Not with that particular, because you own your own company. Well, when you left the district attorney, I meant how long did you?
Oh, I got this little office above a bar in Steamboat, and before long, I had an office in Denver. And back then, you could buy tickets for the airplane in books. You didn't have to go through security. You just walk out, hand them the coupon, and get on this Continental Airlines plane, and go to Denver. And I could go at 6 a.m. and a lot of times be on the last flight home and not have to spend the night. Eventually, that got old, and I would spend 2 or 3 days down there.
And you would investigate for the defense?
For defense attorneys,
I think I got confused somewhere in all of that.
Yeah, well, there's it's kind of a great, you're essentially doing the same job, but...
for the other team.
Well, see, I try to look at it, and I tell people to this day, I'm not a client's advocate. That's the lawyer's job. I would say 70% of the news that I bring back to the attorney or my employees is bad news, but the attorney has to hear that so they don't get ambushed in court. I mean, these people will lie to you all the time, and their alibi, the fastest way to get convicted is a false alibi. So you have to, and the attorney has to know if his client's a liar, and many times there are. And then he has to he can deal with it. There's various legal strategies, but I'm generally not a part of that,
Do you think that it happens then that, I've always wondered this, if I murdered somebody and I swear I didn't murder anybody, and my lawyer is there to defend me, if I say to my lawyer, I totally murdered somebody, they still have to, or do
totally confidential.
But they still have to behave as if you didn't. And
right.
That's got to be so insane. That reminds me of the movie The Devil's Advocate. Did you ever see that movie?
Yeah.
Al Pacino makes a good devil.
Yeah.
You were a part of 3 very high-profile cases. May we talk about those? So I mentioned already briefly Timothy McVeigh. So we have Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma bomber. We have the John Benet Ramsey case, and we have Eric Harris of Columbine.
Well, those are the ones that are kind of national notoriety.
The big ones,
There were some in the state that made big news in the city and state.
Of Denver?
Colorado and Denver, but...
Is there one in particular that you call to mind?
The Chuck E. Cheese murders. This fellow was an ex-employee. He went in and executed the manager. I think it was after hours. And 2 other people, 2 other employees. And... it was probably one of the first, it wasn't really a mass shooting, but shooting 3 people. Now it's nothing. Back then it was a big deal, This is probably in the late 80s. I try to forget a lot of this, but he was out of control as a client back then. And he had one of the best attorneys defense attorneys in the state. He was out of control, and until last year, I had not seen him until they drug him out of the courtroom after the judge had sentenced him to death. The judge came up before the sentencing in the hallway behind the courtroom and said, "Ellis, am I about to commit sin?" And that kind of stunned me. Because
he's sentencing someone to death. How did you get involved with the Timothy McVeigh case? You met him?
Oh, yeah.
You're in Colorado. How do you go from Colorado to Oklahoma?
Well, I worked on his appeal. I didn't work on the original case. Now, I hired some people who had worked on, what's the other guy's name?
McVeigh's partner?
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Anyway, that worked on his team with Michael Tiger.
Isn't that wild that we don't remember that guy's name?
I try not to. I was in Seattle, I think it was Christmas or Thanksgiving, and I got a call from this attorney who was a fairly high-profile attorney in Colorado, and he had just been appointed by Judge Mach to represent Timothy McVeigh on appeal. And when you're doing an investigation on an appeal, you essentially, you don't have a fresh crime scene. You don't have, witnesses are kind of dated, although his case went pretty quickly. You essentially reinvestigate the case. In other words, was the prosecution really able to prove the case, and or was his defense attorney deficient in his practice and how he handled the case? And that's how a lot of those, particularly in death penalty cases, that goes on a lot.
Yeah, the appeals process happens a lot.
Appeal, but there's always, seems like in so many of them, there's allegations of poor work on the attorney's part, and that may or may not be true. I've seen it both ways.
But obviously he did not get his appeal because he was put to death.
Well, he pulled his appeals against his attorney's request. Me and my staff were out in Oklahoma quite a bit because that's where his original attorney was from. And I met a lot of people involved in the case originally.
What was he like?
Well, I first saw him when I was actually down at what we call AdMax, but it's this federal supermax down in Florence, Colorado. And I was in one booth with an attorney on another case, or visiting booths, but you can see. And McVeigh was in the next booth with his attorney, who I ended up later working for as part of the appellate team. But at one point I remember this attorney beating on the window and saying, "Are you listening to us?" And my attorney said, "Fuck you, I don't care about him," It's kind of crazy, but... So at that time, I didn't know I'd ever be involved with him. And then I got a call. I was in Seattle, like I said, for Thanksgiving or Christmas. I have a sister there, and the attorney said, "Will you work on it?" And I said, "Sure." There again, I didn't have much time to think. I first started seeing McVeigh when he was at Supermax in Florence, Colorado. And then he was eventually transferred to death row in Terre Haute. And I would fly back there every 2 or 3 weeks, maybe, either with an attorney or often by myself, just to meet with him. So I got to know him fairly well.
What'd you think?
Well, there's an adage that an old pathologist taught me when I started in homicide, and he said, before I start every autopsy, I remind myself this is one day some mother's newborn baby. And those words have kind of served me well. Particularly in dealing with criminals, as I do now, who've done terrible things. The day they were born, they weren't formed this way. We, society, formed them somehow, unless there's an obvious, brain trauma or something like that. And I used that with McVeigh. I didn't approve of what he did. He didn't, we didn't talk a lot about Oklahoma City, about the bombing itself, because he pretty quickly, he knew he didn't want to die in prison, and he knew that's where, if he didn't get the death penalty, that's where he was going to be.
Someone was going to kill him.
No, they did. No, that he could.
Oh, you mean
theoretically life without the possibility of parole.
Because I know some people like Dahmers, they get killed in prison.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
What's his name?
Oh, wait, did he get killed in prison or did he get the death penalty?
Oh, it's that Whitey Bulger.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there you go.
That old mafia guy or
that's
whatever.
Right. Epstein, maybe.
Yeah, that's a suicide.
You think he's suicide?
Yeah. I don't. Yeah.
I
don't know the ins and outs of it, but from when I read it, that happens every day across the country.
In prison?
Almost. In prisons, local jails, county jails.
Suicide is high rate of...
I wouldn't say it's high, but it's not uncommon.
Interesting.
So to make Epstein's a big deal, the Attorney General, I've had 2 clients kill themselves in jail. And the United States Attorney General never really got involved.
Okay, let's get back to Timothy McVeigh. We talked a little bit earlier off mic. Firstly, I'm curious why it is you think that he didn't talk about Oklahoma much. And secondly, I think it's commendable that you are able to see humanity, see the human in the monster. It's very easy to put our monsters in these particular places because that's the monster, I'm the human. But as you said, it doesn't take necessarily a whole lot to shape a monster out of a human.
Right.
And the biggest thing, I think that the biggest fallacy, I suppose, is that we go along thinking there's not a monster in us. That is just sleeping, in a way.
Yeah,
it's a sleeping giant.
I don't think I knew some of the people who knew him, and I don't think anybody saw something like this coming. He came back from Iraq, I think, wasn't it? When I was meeting with him generally, and particularly towards the end, he was more fascinated by the media attention that was being paid to him. Gore Vidal had visited him in prison. I was president when Ed Bradley of 60 Minutes or some one of those shows, I think it was 60 Minutes.
You were there?
Interviewed him with his attorney's permission. I think that's the narcissism coming through because he kind of got charged up by all the attention. There were reporters that followed that story for years. It was their soul.
Did he have remorse? I'm fascinated by the idea of that.
I don't recall seeing any.
Yeah.
I think I would remember it.
I don't recall seeing any either in any of the things that I saw, but you obviously had privy that...
Well, unlike the public's persona of him, which is generally that picture where they're taking him out of the jail and he's got a flak jacket on and he's kind of looking straight ahead, no expression. He was a pretty animated guy and he was considerate. He would always ask about my staff, how are they doing?
And he preferred the death penalty to life in prison. That's what he wanted?
Absolutely. He pulled his appeals. And one of the harder things I had to do was they sent me to tell his father that he was dropping his appeals and he was going to be executed. And his father, who was a great guy, it was a snowy night in a suburb of Buffalo, New York. And he says, in this little house kind of out in the country, I go in. I don't know if he anticipated, I think he probably anticipated why I was coming. But I said, Bill, you know, Tim is dropping his appeals and he's going to be executed. And he said, you know, Ellis, I love my son, but I believe in the death penalty. Would you like a cocktail? Or I think he called it a highball, but, you know, which I did, but I waited till I got back to the hotel. I wasn't going to be drinking with McVeigh's father. You know?
That's a little weird. Do you think that he, and again, this is conjecture, you're not Timothy McVeigh, but Do you think it was fear of life in prison or the idea of martyrdom by death penalty that appealed to him more?
You know, I think I got to know the warden at Terre Haute reasonably well. He went on to become the director of Bureau of Prisons, but once they decided they were going to execute him, then were more involved with the prison. And oddly enough, the people at the prison really liked McVeigh, the correctional officers. He was easy. He would give them advice in his own weird way on security. He didn't give them any trouble. They had to rotate the ones that had been with him the longest out the week before his execution.
It's military. There's discipline there. There's an understanding. I interviewed somebody on the show, Adam, in the first year, and he had served time in prison. He'd also been in the military and, did his time there. And he said it's not that different, the two.
No, it's real structured.
Yeah, so that's a lot to take in.
The worst thing that McVeigh, on the day of his execution, the worst, in my opinion, and I think it's shared by many who knew him or were involved in the case, the worst thing that the warden could have said that morning was, "Tim, we're not going to execute you. We're going to put you away, lock you up, throw the key away. No more attorneys, no more journalists, no more Ellises coming to see you. That'll be then your life." And that would have mortified him. I talked to him about 30 minutes before his execution.
It's fascinating to think, again, you getting to see the more human side of the monster.
But I still saw the monster. Yeah. I mean, I separated them. I still do.
But I think it's important to recognize that there's a very fine line sometimes within a person.
Right, exactly. You're exactly right. Or at least, I mean, I'm no forensic psychiatrist, but that's my lay opinion, or probably better than lay. But I've seen good people do bad things.
Yeah, of course.
The agreement with the government in lieu of an autopsy on his body, which they generally do, which I find ironic since they just killed him. They agreed not to do an autopsy because people were trying to get parts of his body, and so the agreement was that I would go that morning to the prison and meet with him. It was very brief, just to be sure he hadn't been beaten or anything like that prior to his execution. I don't remember what I exactly said. I think I said, "Tim, are you okay? You ready to go?" or something. Probably something kind of callous, but he seemed solemn but not real nervous, and the next time I saw him, he was dead. About 45 minutes later.
I would think that they would at least want to look at his brain.
I think that's the rationale, and they do on a lot of them. That day, there were people. I finally found a funeral home in Terre Haute that would cremate him, and somehow the media figured out which funeral home, because most of them turned me down or turned the attorneys down. And this one funeral home said, "Yeah, well, And while they were cremating him, me and one of my employees were just kind of hanging around, and people, I don't remember if it was the funeral home, but anyway, there were calls. I think it was at the funeral home or mortuary. People offering money for like hair or something so they could prove he was dead.
Celebrity of the macabre.
Exactly. And the ironic thing is, my colleague, who was a young woman about 27 or 28, was with me, and we got him cremated and drove back to Indianapolis, and she put him in her backpack. And we got on the plane the next morning. I was in first class because I'm so tall, and she was in coach, and she ended up sitting next to a reporter, and the reporter asked her, started chatting her up and told her that he'd been covering the McVeigh execution and that there were rumors that his body or him alive had been flown out of the country, similar to the Epstein, and what this reporter didn't know, and I don't know who he was, that his McVeigh's ashes were right under this seat in front of him.
It's crazy.
I had to laugh about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, many times in this job you have to laugh to keep from crying.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you have a dark sense of humor, and it comes across as callous.
No, I mean, I often think of, the comic, right? Comics generally have very dark pasts.
Robin Williams. Yeah.
Exactly. Because if you don't laugh, you will burst into tears and flames and, shake off the mortal coil. How does one... I'm trying to think of how to ask this. The difference between somebody like a Timothy McVeigh, a grown man, and then switch gears to an Eric Harris, a child at Columbine.
Well, I never knew Harris.
You knew his parents.
I was out in California when this happened, and I was visiting another soon-to-be death penalty client who was about to be extradited back to to Colorado. And when I was leaving, the deputies, I was going down the elevator, and they said, "Did you hear what happened in Colorado?" I said, "No." He said, "There was a big school shooting." So I went out to my car where my pager was, and it was full. It was my employees. And at that time, all my employees were women, much younger than me. And, I get a lot of jokes about it, but they're very excellent and still are. The attorney for... When they first got the call, the attorney for the family did not know if Eric was dead or not. Jennifer, the investigator, eventually was able to contact the coroner or somebody in law enforcement and determined that he was dead. So they took his parents, and I got off the plane and went directly to the hotel where they put the parents up. And it was in my name with my credit card, or company credit card. And I remember I walked in, and the mother was laying on this big bed, curled up in the fetal position, sobbing. The father, who was a former pilot, came up to me and said some things that I just can't say. And so we ended up, there was rumors that they were going to be criminally charged for allowing,
the firearms,
that kind of stuff. There was a lot of, that was the first big school shooting. And they were some of the nicest people I ever met. They had done everything they could. They knew he was troubled. They had done everything they could. One of the first people to get a lawyer in his circle was his psychiatrist, who lawyered up, so I couldn't even talk to him.
It's interesting, when I was in high school, I knew kids like him, that personality.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what it is about now versus then that is the tipping point that this is happening so much.
Well, unfortunately, I think there's it's like a snowball rolling downhill, and Columbine may have started it. I mean,
and immortalized.
mass shootings are not uncommon these days.
And do you think it's a copycat type situation, or is there?
Well, it's not quite that simple, but I think there's, in my opinion,
element to that.
Yeah, element to that. John Douglas would be the person to ask about that.
Yeah, John Douglas for sure, profiler extraordinaire. And again, the celebrity of the macabre. I think that these people they become their own Bonnie and Clydes, or we put their pictures all over the papers and we say their names over and over again, and I know serial killers really enjoy that kind of limelight.
I'm not sure that Harris and Klebold had any examples to follow, but I think I have to believe that in some way they started what is coming today.
They were the tipping point.
But I say that, and I also tell you that to this day his parents are some of the nicest people I've met, and my staff and I were around them for probably close to a year. And
I do think that the public opinion, what is it, the court of public opinion, looks to the parents and says, what did you do? What did you do that created, again, this monster?
Well, they got accused, of not knowing he had guns. Well, how many parents in the suburb go in the crawl space under their house unless there's a plumbing leak?
I'll go on a limb and say parents don't know anything about their teenage kids, period. End of story.
Well, I think it's more apparent now.
Yeah, no matter how much they think they know, they don't know.
I mean, this was before the internet really, it was as accessible as it is now.
Sure.
And I kept his ashes and McVeigh's sitting next to each other in my locker for a long time. And I think somebody got McVeigh's first and somebody got Harris's. But they were kind of close in time. I forget whether I did those together or whether there was an overlap.
When somebody commits a heinous crime like that, or any capital crime, do their last wishes get carried out? Like if a Klebold or a Harris or a McVeigh say, I want my ashes scattered here, there, or the other, does that happen?
Yeah, I don't think those people think that. They're not thinking that far ahead.
So what happens? So when you say somebody took it, what does that mean?
I didn't want to know, and I don't.
I see. Got it.
There were rumors that someone was going to spread them on the Oklahoma City Memorial and that kind of stuff.
That seems weird.
Well, but that's the kind of, I mean, all these conspiracy theorists. I had an office with, I think, 13 people, and we had a whole building, and these conspiracy theorists would walk into the building to the point that we had to get a robbery alarm, not a burglar alarm, but a robbery alarm. And none of them, it turns out, were pretty benign, but the Denver police were concerned enough to came to me, because I was gone a lot and my employees were there pretty much by themselves.
I believe in some conspiracies because they turn out to be true, but a lot of it, I feel like human beings need an answer. Because exactly. They can't wrap their brain around the fact that somebody would blow up dozens of people, or a kid would go kill a bunch of other kids, or it makes no sense. And so they come up with these fantastical... The fact is, some people are just sick or evil, if evil is a thing. I don't know.
I'm not that perceptive.
Yeah. But I think that is what... I am aware of your time, and you've given me so much, but I would like to talk about, I know you can't talk about the particulars for an open case, which I assume the Ramsey case is still open. Is, yeah. Is there anything that you can...
Well...
It is a case that has fascinated everyone.
And still does. I still probably 5 or 6 times a year either get emails or phone calls from people, women wanting to turn in their ex or estranged husband as a suspect, or I've gotten them from nursing homes in Florida. I remember once I got a tape it was called The Ode to John Bonet, from some old boy in a nursing home in Florida. And he wanted me to have John Ramsey pay to have it published, or, produced, however you do it. I had a 4-door cabinet full of correspondence from all over the world.
Everyone trying to solve it.
Yeah, it brings out, that case really brought out the worst in people.
It was the child that looked like an adult, all intents and purposes.
Well, I understood that better than most, because in the South, that's kind of prevalent. Mm-hmm. To this day, they still have beauty pageants, and people buy the franchise for Little Miss Brentwood or something like that, and the people pay, and their kids get in it, and they get a charge out of it. Mm-hmm.
Well, people are horrified by the fact that Jean Benet looked like that, and yet the shows that have come on since her death, the Tiara shows, on the one hand there's this, oh my God, on the other hand these are huge hit shows. Do you know what I'm saying? That weird fascination with things.
And it continues to this day. And it amps up, like on the 5th, the 10th, the 15th, and this last year, I think it was the 20th anniversary of her death, it peaks again. Mm-hmm. And some producer will have a show and invite doctors and stuff to try to rehash it.
Why do you think it's been so difficult to solve a case like that?
It's always my opinion that the scene was not handled properly by the police, particularly the police detective, who was a great person, but she just made a mess. And did that make a difference? I don't know, but I know that's a major problem with it.
Do you think that in an era where there is the CSI, where there is all this pageantry of gadgets and gizmos to help solve crime, that because crimes were solved back when that stuff didn't exist, right, yeah. So does that actually become its own block in some cases? Or in a case like that? I'm saying that even if there was a mess of the crime scene that back in the day, people used to walk through crime scenes and, people would pick things up and nobody knew about DNA and all that.
That's what happened here. I mean, John actually found the body. The mm-hmm. detective let him go searching, mm-hmm. Which on many levels was wrong to him to have to find her, because I never knew her. I saw the pictures and they were horrible, much more than the public understands. And it wasn't fair to John, no matter what people think of him, for the police to cut him loose in the house to search for his daughter. That's not what you do.
I don't think that one's going to get solved.
I don't know.
Yeah. DNA evidence now is, every day I open the Yahoo or the CNN or whatever, and another person has been picked up for 20-year-old crimes, 30-year-old crimes. It's extraordinary.
Well, a lot of that today, that technology wasn't used back when John Bonet was killed. And there was DNA, and there was DNA recovered there. But back then you didn't have these huge banks of DNA samples. Now everyone that goes into prison gets a DNA sample. Everyone in the military, they're everywhere.
23andMe has my DNA sample.
Yeah, right. I always wanted to get my father's DNA done while he was still alive, so he could realize that he may have some African American blood in him, because he was an old Southerner. But I don't know if it made a difference or not, but the DNA, now a lot of them in the past few years, this has been the familial DNA, and there's a lot of controversy over rights to privacy and that sort of thing. But
I feel like in fact, I know I am okay with somebody looking at my DNA if it means catching a murderer or rapist. Yeah. I have no problem with that whatsoever.
No, I don't either.
But that's me. I mean, I understand other people have issues with that right to privacy and things, but take it. Take all you want. If it catches the person that does the bad thing, I'm okay with that. How does one... It's one thing to deal with like Timothy McVeigh's parents, their father, and a whole other thing to deal with a child's parents. How do you do that?
It's very difficult. I first met them when they got off a plane in an airport in Denver, and I knew them for a couple of years. And right after they came back from Atlanta was when I got involved in the case. Or they came back, maybe was involved a little bit before then, but Burke, who's been drugged through the mud, was various theories. I call them armchair theories, but I remember taking him out in the street and playing with these electric cars that he'd gotten for Christmas just to get him away from what was going on inside the house. So...
That's the brother.
The brother, yeah.
For those who don't know.
I mean, he was 10 or something like that.
Mm. Yeah. What is your plan now? You still have Armistead Investigations.
I've scaled down now. I have one employee who I'm very proud of. She's 23 years old, deals with very difficult cases, a lot of sexual assaults. I think the Me Too movement, I don't necessarily disagree with it, but I think it's given people license to at times make false accusations, particularly teenagers. I mean, I see kids now are charged criminally for shit I did in high school, I mean, we've got one where a kid allegedly touches this girl's butt walking down the hallway. Well, I mean, give me a break. It doesn't make it right, but, that's... And they want him to register as a sex offender. Well...
Yeah, the pendulum is swinging wildly.
Way over in that area. And most of them, a high percentage of them are legit.
Absolutely.
But
there's always going to be
there's
people
going to be that 20 or 25%.
And it's super unfortunate because of that, making the real ones seem not true. Because,
right.
And I mean,
it's a two-edged sword, yeah.
Yeah, if I collect up 10 of my girlfriends, 8 of them have been sexually assaulted. Mm-hmm. It is, I mean, I think about that. I remember being at a high school party and drinking, and it was the only time in my life I ever blacked out from alcohol. We had stolen wine from my parents and mixed it with soda pop or grape juice. I don't even remember what, but it was unholy. Drinking it and being so drunk and then passing out in one of the rooms and waking up in a pitch black room and a boy kissing me. And I was madly in love with this boy named Peter who didn't know I existed. And apparently this other boy, Michael, had a I don't know, whatever thing for me. But I woke up and I was like, what's going on? Who is this? And he said it's Peter. And so I was like, what? And my drunk self was like, oh my God, and I started kissing back. And then my brain came back online and I went, nuh-uh, and all the other faculties started coming back, shoved him off and ran out the door. Now, all these years later, would I go back and say, let's throw that, do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
And now he's a grown man, he has children, daughters, all that stuff. Does he remember that? I doubt it. Did it shape me? Not really, didn't shape me, but I remember it. So it's also the person and the people and the where and the how and the that, and everyone has their own story.
See, that's why most of one of the reasons the one full-time employee I have is she's young because so many of these allegations arise out of high school. I don't know how to talk to a high schooler. Witnesses. I never knew what is it, WhatsApp or that thing where they send pictures. What's the name of that?
Twitter does it. WhatsApp.
Yeah,
Snapchat.
WhatsApp. What apps? Or Snapchat. I guess it's Snapchat is used a lot.
Sure. But there were kids in my high school that were raped, date raped.
Oh, sure.
And in college as well.
No, it happens all the time.
That's just, at my age, it's like, oh, that's just part of your growing up as a woman. The thing that women...
Back then, it was part of your experience.
Yeah. How screwed up is that?
Yeah,
it is screwed up. It's so screwed up to think like, oh, and all of my girlfriends have similar stories. It's like, oh, yeah, that's just part of what we went through. Anymore, having language like, oh, that's just the thing that we experienced, it's not acceptable language. It's, holy shit, that happened. Oh my gosh, let's do something about that.
Right.
Yeah, it's just a different time.
And the communication now, the Snapchat, I think that's the one that goes away pretty quickly. But these kids are sending nude pictures back and forth, and
we have become so numb and so desensitized that now and everything is a commodity.
I've dealt with parents, and I couldn't say anything because they're not the client. Or I really couldn't, they're witnesses, but if you could only see what your daughter was Snapchatting to this dude.
Yeah, it gets complicated. And nothing is, these things last forever. I mean, people just screenshot anything,
Well, really on Snapchat, that's about the only way you can, if you're lucky.
That it goes away.
Texting, which they've kind of learned not to do, we can download it.
I feel, though, that somewhere there's a room where there's a computer that does log all this stuff. I mean, once it happens, there's still a footprint of it somewhere.
I don't know, you'd have to ask Courtney.
Yeah, well, I would love to get a computer forensics person on the show.
I know a good one.
Oh, you do? Oh, well, maybe we can talk. Because I think that would be incredibly fascinating. Ellis, this has been enlightening and intense. Thank you for your time. Humans, huh? Woo. Thanks, Ellis.
Sure.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. Bye. Don't forget to rate and review Hey Human on iTunes. Thanks. Bye.